Welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. As most of the world takes steps towards reopening, Hong Kong is stuck in a bit of a paradox. SAR leaders have prioritized the resumption of cross-border travel with the mainland. But Beijing's unwavering commitment to its zero-COVID policy has backed Hong Kong into a corner. Let's bring in Southern District Council Vice Chairman Paul Zimmerman. He believes that Hong Kong should resume global travel before reopening the mainland border, and he has laid out some compelling reasons to back up that argument. Councillor, welcome to Talk the Walk.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Now, Paul, tell us more about these reasons. Why do you think that prioritizing opening up with mainland China before the rest of the world is not such a good idea?
Well, I think that it has been a good idea for a long time for Hong Kong that we're first going to open up with the mainland before we're going to open up with the rest of the world, because for a long time, we were basically on one strategy. Both Hong Kong and the mainland were on zero COVID. The rest of the world was battling COVID, and our priority was vaccination, and then we would see what's going to happen. Now we have a divergence. Hong Kong is developing herd immunity, with a lot of it natural immunity from the recent outbreak with Omicron. And the mainland is still well behind. So the immunity levels in the mainland are very much only driven by their own vaccination rates. And so it is, with this divergence in mind, we just have to say, well, should we then should Hong Kong switch and move along with the rest of the world instead of with the mainland first? And I think that there is good reasons to do that. Economically, very important that we move on, that the economy opens up, that travel resumes, that business resumes, that I would think that public health, that people can start moving again, have a holiday. People have been stuck in Hong Kong for 2 years. So I think there are very, very good reasons to get moving, but to get moving in a separate pace with the mainland.
We've heard the merits of your arguments, but now let's delve into the practicality of your suggestions. Since March, mainland China has added more than 130,000 COVID cases. Some attributed the Omicron outbreak on the mainland to infections imported from Hong Kong. Now, I wonder, how do you plan on convincing our political leaders that opening up Hong Kong before mainland does is of their political interests?
Okay, well, the point you raise is about how do we protect the mainland's healthcare system. And I think that as we speak today, it's well being challenged. We all get the stories from Shanghai, how the outbreak is spreading, and the kind of extreme measures that have to be taken to try to contain it. So the mainland is going to need time to come to grips with the spread of the Omicron. It has to come to grips with how does it get herd immunity? How does it get the immunity level up in its country? So in the country overall. So it's an issue of timing. Sell Hong Kong in the meantime, open up with the rest of the world, and then the mainland goes through its motions to get the herd immunity up in the country overall. And that's the question that we need to ask. And that's a discussion that needs to be had. And I think that we see this discussion already taking place in social media on the mainland. Some national advisors have already commented on the need of moving away from zero COVID. And so we just have to see that the country overall can do that. Then the second question is, if Hong Kong moves ahead, will that negatively impact the mainland? i.e., are we going to cause a greater or faster growth of the infection rate in the mainland, and therefore threaten the healthcare system? Or can we control? Now, between Hong Kong and the mainland, the traffic is extremely controlled. And so to make sure that the infection, the cross-infection between the mainland and Hong Kong remains limited, there are all types of measures that have been taken and that are being taken to keep that under control and limit our impact on the healthcare system on the mainland.
Understood, but let's set aside a consideration on mainland authorities for a second. I want to focus on our mindset in Hong Kong here. The reason I asked you that question is because you've said our local leaders need to speak up for our local interest and seek understanding from Beijing. Now, given the reasonable prospects that former Chief Secretary John Lee, a man who appears to have earned Beijing's approval by offering unwavering support for the central government's policies, and thus, of course, a strong proponent for the so-called zero-COVID strategy, how realistic do that render the scenario that you'd hope for?
But I mean, I'm actually quite confident that if we get a leader in Hong Kong who is well respected and is the person that Beijing has agreed to run here, that once that person has the seat, that he can stand up and battle for Hong Kong's interest effectively on the mainland and with mainland and national leaders. I mean, we have to get to the point that the mayor of Hong Kong does what the mayor of Guangzhou does, what the Guangzhou does, what the mayor of Shanghai does. The city leaders fight for their interest. They are the ones that battle with Beijing to make sure that they get what they need for their economy. And once John Lee is in seat, he is going to have to be driven by the economic reality of the absolute isolation of a city that has had its merit and success in being a global trading center, that was the hub between closed mainland and the rest of the world for almost a century, that has been growing and providing the financial support for the growth of the mainland for many, many decades in the previous century. So that role and that background, taking that into account, I think that John Lee will have to become very sensitive to that once he is the chief executive. And then once he has that role, he can speak up and he can actually battle it out.
We'll get to the relationship between our SAR government here and the mainland authorities in just a second. But looking back at the course of the pandemic here, it seems like restrictions, including lockdown measures, served only the purpose of stalling, right, delaying the transmissions of the coronavirus, the widespread transmissions we've seen in Hong Kong in the past few weeks. What else needs to happen for the government to admit there's at least a possibility that the direction we're heading down the path of the pandemic is somewhat problematic?
Well, I think that what's happening is this, what I call the sad summer of 2022 prospect right ahead of us. We've been close and isolated from the world in 2020 and 2021. Many people did not visit their families and relations overseas. And now it starts to look like it that this coming summer, we're not going to have flights. We're not going to have seats on airplanes. We're not going to have an opportunity for people to travel again for a third year. I think this is not going to sit well with Hong Kong. And the debate has already started on social media. The comments have already, and the questions have been put to the chief executive already, and she's denied that these flight bans are crippling us and that there is a real issue here. But I think that the community overall, as they start looking at what the summer is going to be, whether they can again not meet up with family and friends in the summer, it's going to be very, very telling, and it's going to be a significant discussion point.
Now, one of the counter arguments to your suggestion, excuse me, would be, is the exact measures that we're talking about, the very strict travel restrictions, lockdown measures, social distancing, curbs that have saved us in the first place when the rest of the world was engulfed by the coronavirus. And right now, we cannot just turn against the very measures that keep us safe for more than, 2 years now, just because the rest of the world feels like they're giving up.
Okay, and I think this is a compelling point, and that makes it the pivot and making a switch requires good communication to all sides. But the evidence is in the level of immunity that we have reached in Hong Kong. And I have not seen yet very good research done, kind of testing the serology test to make what is the current immunity level in Hong Kong. And once we start testing that and we have that evidence in front of us, and it doesn't take long. I mean, you just need a week or two to go out in the community and start doing testing. The Hong Kong University can give those results very quickly to demonstrate what level of immunity we have reached in Hong Kong. And once that is clear, then we can be confident that as we open up and we're taking a little bit more risk for infections, that we have the capacity in our healthcare system, in our quarantining facilities, that we have the capacity in place to cope with it without crumbling.
All right, we'll talk more about that after the break. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.